You're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landes. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Landes, and I'm thrilled you're here with me today. If you are new to the podcast, I am a physician and public health nutritionist who is on an anti-diet mission. I particularly help women who are looking to extract themselves from a life of chronic dieting, and I have a signature group coaching program. And if you are listening to this, it is in real time. If you're listening in real time, it's towards the middle to end of July here, and I am ramping up for a new group cohort that's going to be starting the second week of August, and I would love you in there with me. So I will put a link in the show notes if you are interested in finding out some details about my Get Eatfluenced group coaching program. It's an 8-week program that includes some coaching calls, a digital course, and some other great features. The link is in the show notes, and you can go get on the wait list to find out more details. So today's episode is about mental health, and I wanted to bring some spotlight to this aspect of the anti-diet culture because it is an integral component of how both individuals heal their relationship with food and eating and body image and all sorts of things. And it also is a conversation that we need to be having as a group about how each one of us and our interaction with food, and particularly the language we use around food and our bodies, is either going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I hope that after today's episode, you will find yourself as part of the solution. I have a guest today. I have Jill Pentangelo, who is a board-certified psychiatric and mental health nurse practitioner. She has worked in the nursing field for over 20 years, and she's specifically been a psychiatric and mental health nurse practitioner for 7. She also has postgraduate training and a certificate in addictions counseling. So she has a lot of experience both in bedside clinical nursing as well as inpatient and outpatient mental health. She strives to promote self-confidence and self-care without succumbing to the principles of diet culture. I love the word succumbing because that's really what it is it just feels so hopeless sometimes that we are almost just hopelessly oppressed by diet culture. But she is a light and has a wonderful scope of knowledge about mental health and is very attuned to this anti-diet culture and how mental health applies in our healing from diet culture, both as individuals and as a community. So I hope you enjoy this interview episode with Jill Pentangelo. All right, and welcome to the Eatfluencer Podcast. Jill, how are you today? I'm so glad to have you on this episode.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Well, I wanted to bring you on here because I don't have a ton of guests. I'm pretty particular about who comes on here and talks about the anti-diet culture because there's a lot of people talking and not a lot of people doing. But you are one of the ones doing, and you have a unique background in the mental health field, which is such an important component of this. So if you could just sort of briefly introduce yourself, and we don't need like your resume, but just how you came to be interested in these issues in regards to mental health, nutrition, and this sort of anti-diet wellness space. That'd be a great place to start.
Sure. So I think that I had mentioned to you before, I've been a registered nurse for a little over 20 years now, and I've been a psychiatric and mental health nurse practitioner for just over 7. And in that time, when I used to work in private practice, one of the groups, I guess, or the subgroups that I used to work with were definitely some patients that had eating disorders. And eating disorders were not limited to the typical, what people seem to think of all the time when
Right.
they think of eating disorders. And hope this isn't a trigger, but the anorexia, bulimia, they also fell into things like binge eating disorder and just a lot of just emotional issues surrounding food as well, even if it didn't fall into the disordered category. And I've always sort of been a person who felt some kind of way about diet culture. I've
Uh-huh.
always, aside from my professional life, I've always felt uncomfortable with it. And I've always kind of thought, well, let's think about the person on the other side of this too. And let's think about what this could be projecting onto their mental health, or what they can be projecting onto themselves. And the more and more that I saw of the anti-diet movement and the anti-diet culture, rejecting of that, I became more and more interested in learning more about it. And I will preface by saying I am not an anti-diet expert. I'm not a nutritionist, but I am learning slowly but surely. And I said, if I'm going to really stand up for these kinds of things, I want to educate myself and
Yeah.
be proficient in it as much as I could.
Well, and you don't have to be a nutritionist or a doctor or a dietitian. It really disrupting this social narrative is going to take all parties. It's going to take people in the mental health profession like yourself. It's going to take people in the policy place and the media I mean, there's just a lot of components, and that's what I really want everybody to understand is that no matter what your specialty in life is, your zone of genius, there's a place in this movement because we need everybody, because the diet culture is so pervasive. It influences all of those things.
Oh,
So,
for
but the
sure.
yeah, the mental health part is big, big, big. So, we talked a little bit ahead of time about how family of origin is sometimes I don't want to say a setup, but I really sort of mean a setup for
Sure.
these sorts of disordered patterns of eating and the emotional component that comes with our relationship to food and our body image. Could you kind of explore some of your thoughts on that? And
Definitely. Sure. Sure. So, what I kind of meant by that when we talk about the family of origin is that whoever you consider your family, or the unit that you grew up most closely around, there, any way you look at it, there are going to be attitudes, behaviors, things like that surround food and eating. Some examples that you and I had previously talked about. For example, when you were growing up, was food a center point, or central point, I should say, of gathering? Was it a point of celebration? Everybody gets together and has a party. They have, huge amounts of
food,
food.
right?
Right.
What's
Exactly.
a
Was
party
it
without
something?
any food? Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's like, was it something to be celebrated among family? Or, excuse me, then you could have the flip side to that at times where, I would hear people when I worked in private practice say, for example, well, my mom was always on a diet, or my mom frequently criticized her body. Or, and I don't mean to single out moms, because dad
Oh,
definitely
but
plays a part in
yes,
these too. I mean, I'm not hating on moms at all by any means, but or was it like, were things said to you as a child about your bodies, or about, do you really think you should be eating that? Or was quote unquote healthy food always what had to be at the center point of everything? Consequently, also, I know that we spoke a little bit about, was food scarcity an issue, or food insecurity? And
right.
that's something that I don't think is talked enough about as well. Was food something that you weren't ever sure you were going to have enough of? Or was it something where it's like, okay, we have enough food now, I better get it while I can,
Right. There's a lot
if
that
that
goes
makes
into it. And
sense?
especially with children, I mean, we're talking the influence of these things can happen even at a pre-verbal stage. I mean, they don't have to be thinking through this like the way you and I are thinking through this. This is just simply a 6, 7-year-old child sitting at the dinner table at let's say a holiday where there's all this food that the mom prepared, but the mom's not eating because she's quote dieting and watching her weight or whatever the term is. That,
Right.
do you know how confusing that messaging is to a child? I mean,
Sure. And children, I mean, we don't give them enough credit, I don't think, because just because they're small people doesn't mean that they can't hear and they can't see. And I don't think that we give enough credence a lot of times to how much adult behaviors shape how we become and our thinking patterns as when we become adults ourselves.
right. And it doesn't even have to be what the adults are even saying, just their actions.
Sure.
It leaves an impression, and it's like, okay, is one comment or one thing going to really wreck this child's relationship with food forever? I don't know. I guess if it was impactful enough, it could. But the problem is when you see that over and over and over, it is just, uh, it becomes so normative to be shaming of yourself and confused about eating, right?
Sure. And, I can draw on a specific example. Somebody who I had recently seen on social media, a very popular blogger, who said, from the time up until she was maybe about 10 years old or something like that, she was a normal, happy child, just enjoying, loving life, doing things with their friends and doing normal kid things, quote unquote, until she overheard a family member call her fat, or and
Uh-huh.
made some sort of statement in a roundabout way saying, oh, she's always going to struggle with her weight like her mother did. And that shifted everything at that point for this person for
Right. So
years.
what can happen when you say shifted everything? What is the potential fallout from even something just kind of a fleeting comment like that? What's in from a sort of psychiatric standpoint, where does that push us? Where does that
Well, I mean, for the best way I can think of to describe that is that until a seed is planted, sometimes we may not even know that there's a problem. And I'm doing air quotes now. You know what
yeah,
I does that, if that makes sense?
right.
So, as this person had said, she was just going about her childhood thinking that everything was fine. And when somebody puts a negative comment in your head, at that point your self-image and your personality and all of these, your self-esteem, all of these things are still really being shaped at that point. At 10 years old, we don't know ourselves, let's be honest.
Right.
So it's not saying that everybody is so moldable like this. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who they're very impermeable, and no kind of
Yeah.
comment like that can touch them. I don't know many of them personally, but
Right.
I'm sure they exist. But a lot of people may say, oh my goodness, like this, there's something wrong with me now. I have to do something. I have to change this because there is something wrong with me.
Well, and that's the whole diet culture message, is there's always something wrong with you. It's you.
Right.
If you buy this product, do this program, and it doesn't work, they're not showing you the science that basically shows you this is not going to work in the first place. They're telling you it's your fault. And
100%.
somehow warping our minds that we believe that and come back for more. I mean, that's the crazy part. If you look at it like this is off the topic, but you look at this from a marketing perspective. From a marketing perspective, it's genius. What other product could you sell that fails the client or the customer, blames it on them, and then they come buy more?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know many products that I can think of myself that I purchased it didn't work, and then I'm like, oh, it didn't work, it's my fault, I'm going to go buy 2 or 3 more. And
for the next 50 years.
just yeah, just to kind of prove that it wasn't my fault, like, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And you're absolutely right. And these it isn't a billion-dollar industry, for multi-billion-dollar industry, excuse me,
Right.
for no reason.
Right. Well, I want to shift gears here and tap into some of your expertise with eating disorders, because I've
Sure.
talked a little bit about this, and for complete transparency, I am not an eating disorder physician. This is not my specialty in medicine.
Nor am I.
Yes, but we have a lot of experience, and I think we can at least scratch the surface of this, intelligently. So there's like a spectrum all the way from people with a healthy food relationship to people that have some body image issues and confusion about nutrition, to people that have full out disordered eating patterns, to people that have eating disorders. And an eating disorder, and there's a number of them, as you mentioned, anorexia and bulimia are sort of the cover story from the 80s that we know of,
Mhm.
but there's a
Yes.
lot more nuance to it. And those are actual psychiatric clinical conditions. I mean, there's a
Correct.
DSM-5 diagnosis, there's a set of criteria. So I think people sometimes, particularly with binge eating disorder, they misunderstand. They think that binge eating is just kind of like overeating. So could you clarify maybe some of that for people just so they understand what the difference is and that sort of thing?
Sure. So binge eating disorder you mentioned the DSM-5, which is the holy grail for psychiatric disorders. And I do have a love-hate relationship with the DSM-5 because, on one hand, it is great for markers for psychiatric disorders because, you in the medical field, you know this as well as anybody. When it comes to medical problems, medical diseases, there are many, many diagnostic tests in order to oftentimes get to the bottom of what's going on with that person's body. Whereas with psychiatric disorders, there's no blood test. There's no, it's basically going on the subjective, which is what the patient tells you, and the objective, which is what you can sensory input, what you can see, what you can observe, correct. So having said that, the DSM-5 does have, I believe it is 4 criteria with several sub-criteria for what binge eating disorder actually is. It is vastly different from the person who just overeats at times or indulges a little too, I don't want to say a little too much, I don't mean to minimize it, but who indulges at times, or, there
fullness, that sort
absolutely,
of thing.
absolutely. Yeah. And there are a lot of psychological factors that play into that too. One of the glaring one that I can think of is the shame that is involved in it. And also the person who binge eats in private instead. They don't oftentimes eat beyond what anyone else does, or sometimes at all. Sometimes people won't eat in front of others, but they will binge in private when no one else is around, eat way beyond the point of fullness, and feel intense guilt and shame surrounding that after the binge is over.
Right. And then having those episodes with some frequency. So that's really part of the diagnostic
frequency. Exactly.
Criteria. Mm-hmm. So that's just important. And I just want to make that as a note because people sort of throw around this term of binging. And really what I think most people mean when they say that is overeating or eating past fullness, which is there's a lot of emotional baggage that comes with that too. But
sure. Mm-hmm.
That doesn't put you in the category of having an eating disorder.
That's correct.
What, the guilt and shame piece, and we don't have to specifically talk about binge eating, but the guilt and shame of, let's just say, eating disorder patients in general, my experience is that is a major challenge to their recovery. And I'd like to sort of see where that comes from. And if anybody, anybody can sort of help to support people in recovery. Because the more and more I work in this space, I talk to so many, particularly women, who are like, I had an eating disorder in college. I had anorexia in college. More people than I have ever even imagined. So I know that all of us, everybody listening to this, interacts with some people in their life who are probably in recovery from an eating disorder, whether or not they know that. And how can anybody sort of support them and avoid those guilt and shame triggers, because that's so big.
On a very basic, that's a good question. And I mean, on a very basic level, I feel like, and this is again being touched on quite a bit in the anti-diet realm, I feel like just the conversations about what people are eating, what people's bodies look like, the complimenting or of weight loss, the shaming or the put down of weight gain, all of these kinds of factors are a good start. I mean, I don't have the concrete answer to that, but as far as supporting people,
well, I mean, I think that's a pretty good concrete answer, to be honest, is what other people eat or don't eat and what their body looks like is frankly just not up for conversation.
It really is. And,
if we
it's really,
start
it's
there,
nobody's
that's a good
business.
place, right? I mean,
It is. It is. And, and one of the other things that I can think of, just an example I can draw on from private practice is I do know that when people are suffering from an eating disorder, one trigger word that I've heard many patients mention to me in the past is when somebody says to them, "You look healthy."
yeah.
For some reason, that oftentimes a light bulb goes off in that person's mind that says, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that I've gained weight? Oh my goodness. Does that mean that what does that mean? Did I look bad before? So again, the hamster wheel of thought starts spinning. And it really, the simplistic answer to this is just the commenting of people's bodies and what people are eating is really, unless you're saying that looks really good, can I try a piece or
Right.
something like that, it's really not for anyone to say whether what you're eating is up to you, what they are eating is up to your standards or not.
Right. And the thing is that there's a lot of damage done by well-meaning people who think
Absolutely.
that telling somebody else, wow, you look like you've lost weight is like the best compliment they could give another human.
Sure.
And unfortunately, I've said this a lot, that you don't really know what you're praising. I mean, and what that person, how they're receiving that information.
Well, that's exactly right, because I know you had I believe it was you who had mentioned, and I know I've heard this before, when weight loss is praised, we oftentimes don't know what's going on behind that weight loss. Is it intentional, or was it, for example, due to illness? Was it due to extreme stress? Was it due to other factors, poverty? I mean, any kind of factors that, God forbid, could affect anyone at some point in time. And you may not be giving the person the compliment that you think you do. And I do agree that it's oftentimes very well-intentioned people.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you what, let me just put it this way. People will hear me say that and they go, yeah, but I'm talking about like my best friend or my sister, I know that they have money and they don't have cancer and they blah, blah, blah. Okay. But here's the problem for all of us is when you tell somebody else, wow, you look great. You've lost weight. You look fantastic. You are simply reinforcing this narrative that we are all trying to get out of, that small is either number one preferred or number two healthier.
Exactly.
So you're just reinforcing what we're trying to take down.
I couldn't agree more. I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking you're reinforcing the narrative that small equals good, big equals bad. And that's simply not true.
It's not true. And it's not even true, to go a step further, that small equals healthy and big equals unhealthy. That's the whole health at every size movement. And I've talked about that a lot with my clinical background. It's just, you can't tell a person's health by looking them in the face or looking at their body. You just can't. Not a single
That's correct.
human. So why do it's kind of like looking at somebody without them even opening their mouth and saying, I think you look really smart, Jill, or you look really not smart, when you haven't even opened your mouth to say anything, either intelligent or unintelligent, or you look rich, or you look poor, or all these things that are not visible. So why do we make
fair statement?
Mm-hmm. I don't even know why we think that health is like an exception to that rule, but and it's so common. I mean, the before and after pictures, those make me want to just, it just continues to reinforce the message that we should be pursuing smallness. And you don't know who you're in earshot of. You don't know who's going to see that Instagram post. You don't know who's going to really be kind of damaged, because it is a very fragile state to be in recovery from an eating disorder.
Oh, most definitely. And, the way when you talk about the social media posts or something, for example, the rule, and I'm sure I don't always succeed at this too, but I've learned a lot over the last few years. And the rule of thumb that I always try to follow is, if there's a chance that this can hurt someone's feelings, just don't do it. Or if it can trigger something in somebody, just maybe don't say it or don't post it, something to that effect, with, as you mentioned before, the narrative that small is best, or small is what we should all be pursuing.
Right. Well, and I particularly think if we're in health, like you and I are, health professionals, we really need to even hold ourselves to a higher standard, because people are looking to us as authorities in this discipline. So, we're not just sort of like shooting the bull. We're like supposed to be
Right.
giving objective stuff. So, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to shift gears a second because there's something super cool you shared with me. Um, there's a lot of conversation about, is food an addiction? Is food addiction a real thing? Is it not? I will tell you, I'm in the camp with what I know that food addiction is not a thing. Like, you can't be addicted to something that's essentially required for life, but the behavioral components of our relationship with food can mimic addictive patterns. That's sort of the best
Sure.
way I would say it. And you had shared with me this cool, I don't know, I don't want you to explain it, not me, because I'll do a bad job, but
No.
this HALT thing. What is this HALT thing? And where does that come from?
So when I actually completed a postgraduate certificate in addictions counseling as well. And it's an acronym actually. And one of the things that I had learned, now this again applies to substance abuse, but you could easily apply this to eating behaviors as well, because really, as you said, it is not so much an addiction to the substance, if you will, in this case, substance being food, but really the behavior and the thought process surrounding it. The acronym
like an addiction
is
to
HALT.
dieting. We have like a dieting addiction is
Sure.
what we have, really.
Well, right. There's that. And, and I mean, I tend to agree with you about being in the camp of not necessarily believing that food can be an addiction, but I definitely do believe that the thought process and the behavior surrounding it could very well turn into, if not an addiction, definitely an obsessive compulsive type of situation. But the acronym is HALT, HALT. And what that, again, I learned this when it applied to drinking and drug behaviors, but what that stands for is that there are 4 feelings or emotions that you should be aware of that are often triggering for use, to be using. Or in this case, I would shift that to say overeating. The first one is hungry, H, which, let's be honest, that doesn't really fit here, because if you're hungry, you should be eating. That's the way that goes.
But really it fits in, because when we make ourselves hungry and ignore our hunger signals, that drives all those cravings and some of that overeating behavior. I mean, so it is weird to say. I
didn't even think of it that way.
Yeah,
yes.
So it really does fit. I mean, it does
Okay.
fit. So I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna validate the H. We're going with the
Excellent.
H.
All right, we'll validate the H and we'll move on to the A. That's excellent, because I didn't look at it that way. So see, we're both learning here. The A is angry. So if you are, you could hear people say, well, I overeat because I got in a fight with my husband or my wife, or my kids aggravated me, or my boss. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to eat now, to the point of whatever, because I'm really ticked off right now. So that's the A. The L is lonely. And that's a big one, especially, I mean, if anybody can vouch for that in the last year, in the midst of a global pandemic. I mean, a lot of times we were cut off from family and friends. We
Super
were
isolating, right?
Absolutely. Some people were not working outside of the home, or working at all for that matter, and lonely. So you turn to food as your best friend in that point, in that case, your companion. And then the fourth, the T in the HALT, is tired. So I can admit that I'm guilty of this one myself at times. I said, the whole comfort food subculture exists for a reason. And, I mean, I will be the first one to admit that when I'm feeling kind of tired and cranky, that is my trigger for certain.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing about this, Jill, is the solution in regards to food is sort of built into those same 4 principles, because it's in biology. I mean, this is the mind body piece where the psychology and the physiology sort of are married together. Because we talked about hunger. I mean, if you ignore hunger signals from your body, and you're going to be like laser focused on getting food, and
absolutely
those repetitive thoughts about food, and the sort of obsession and the cravings that comes from that. The angry, we always sort of say that stress reduction will help with all of this. Like when you're trying to leave diet culture, it's more than just, throw out your Weight Watchers plan or something. It's really to start taking care of your whole body and your whole self. And stress reduction is part of that because of these like real wild, chaotic emotions like anger fuel the cortisol response. And what does cortisol do? Tell your body, we need some energy. We need to go.
Right.
This is the fight or flight. We better like get some carbs up in here real quick. Like, so handling our emotions a little more completely alleviates a lot of that. And so, but I really like putting this together, not to make this like a med school lecture, but it's just,
no, not
I think
at all. Because
people don't realize that there's a real connection between how you think about food and your actual body. It's not like just some woo-woo, you're crazy thing.
No. And, you actually brought up a good point when you mentioned cortisol too, because a little known fact is that high levels of cortisol for extended period of times, what does that do? Puts us at risk for diabetes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're absolutely 100% correct in, I know stress can't be controlled at all times every day, that life happens, but by learning to tune into yourself and reduce stress anywhere possible is absolutely a good start to that. And also a good jumping off point to avoid those really extreme emotions like anger, for example, with this one that can trigger the behavior.
Yeah. And the same thing with sleep. A lot of the sleep, the circadian rhythms are driven by melatonin and cortisol and those sorts of things. And they have well studied sleep deprivation and insulin resistance, and the fact that there's your body needs that recovery time and that rest and repair time. It's a lot more than just being well rested so you can think better or work out harder, which is what diet culture will tell you, is that, you need to get sleep so you can run harder tomorrow. No, you need to get sleep so that your body can get a rest. But that's really fascinating, because I do think that when we talk about it, like we hadn't even done this before the recording here, but this sort of line item acronym you have is really apropos to the emotional eating, the overeating, that sort of thing, in the same, kind of lens as addiction psychology.
Right. Sure.
And I just want people to know that, and I don't think a lot of people would, disagree that there's some pathology in drug addiction and alcoholism and stuff, but we sort of negate that there's really deep-seated mechanisms in the human body for overeating, disordered eating, emotional eating. It's not a matter of willpower. I'm doing air quotes because my favorite word is willpower. You don't tell people who have a psychiatric condition or a mental health problem to have more willpower.
No, you shouldn't. People probably do all the time.
Exactly. How ignorant is that, right? So really sort of, I think it just makes people have some awakening that these issues are real. And when we charge our environment with weight stigmatization and this anti-fat culture and this healthism and stuff, not only is that not based in science, we also are now adding another layer to people who are already stressed, already, have emotional issues with eating, and sort of, as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, so we take these overweight patients, bring them into the healthcare system, weight stigmatize them, and then, follow up in 10 years and we say, oh, they all have diabetes and high blood pressure. And there's no like control for the fact that they've been marginalized from society for 10 years and have a totally out of control cortisol response. And, and then we publish a paper that says, look, all the fat people have diabetes, and then we bring them back into the office so we can beat them over the head with it.
Right. Not taking into account any of the other factors.
Right. It's just, to me, when I started learning this sort of stuff and how biased even the science that we are, that you and I went to a lot of school. We went to a lot of school for our professions. And I think we just take it at face value because at the time, that's what we have the bandwidth to do. I mean, Heck, you're in
There's a
like,
lot of things that are, I'm
yeah,
sorry,
no, please.
there are a lot of things that are taken at face value. And, I mean, you're also, if you're, most people are familiar with confirmation bias as well. If this
Right.
confirms my narrative, then that's got to be true.
Oh, sure, sure. So
So
we look for what supports what we already believe because that's just it's easier. It's the path of
absolutely.
least resistance to just
Hmm.
find something to support what we already believe because then I don't have to change my belief system.
You
You
got
know.
it. You got it. That's too much work.
Oh
Hmm.
my gosh. Well, we could go on and on. This is just such a rich conversation. And I know we touched on a lot of different things, but I think it's all important. And really, if you had sort of one kind of take home message for people listening to this in terms of how we can help or support this whole anti-diet movement through the lens of mental health, what can we do? What's the I know there's not one take home message, but what's a good take home message?
Oh, goodness. So, as you said, it's really hard to sum that all up in a short amount of time. But the biggest takeaway that I have gotten from since I've started trying to educate myself more and learning more and more about this is to come at, in the last few years, I should even say, just speaking strictly for myself, I've tried to come at things from a much stronger point of empathy. And remember that we're all trying, we're all just trying to make it. Everybody is human, and that where again your comments are well intentioned, not your people's comments are well intentioned. Yes, they are oftentimes well intentioned. They are not always received that way. So just remember that, everybody has their own struggles. Everybody's going through something at some point or another. And just, this doesn't sound like the most sophisticated advice, but be nice, just be kind, and try to just come at this from a place of, if I were in this person's shoes, how would that make me feel? If I were on the receiving end of this comment, compliment, what have you, what would my takeaway be from that?
Right, exactly. Well, thank you. And I think, just even from a super high level, just people recognizing that mental health is health.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
mean,
That's one of my favorite hashtags. Yes.
oh, is it? Okay. I don't
It
even know the
is.
hashtag, but yeah, well, I can see why it would, because it just gets sidelined in so many conversations about nutrition that
Mhm.
even just bringing that back into the conversation so that your mental health has like a seat at the table, I think is important.
Sure. And if your mental health is suffering, and everybody goes through things, like I said, at one point or another in their life, but if your mental health is truly suffering, it's difficult to keep all the other pieces in working order as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they're all interrelated. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the show notes too, not only the, Jill's information, but also I'm going to go ahead and put the contact information for the National Eating Disorder Association, their crisis line and that sort of thing. Because if you feel after this conversation like I might really have an eating disorder, like I think I really, I want to make sure that you're getting more help than listening to my podcast. This is
Most
not
definitely.
a substitute for healthcare, and I want to make sure you have easy access. They have a way that you can contact them either online, you can have a chat, you can call them, you can text them. So that's a good starting point if you don't have another place to go. But that's super important. I am so grateful you came and shared your wisdom, Jill.
Oh my goodness, it was my pleasure.
Yes. And I know that this is not the discipline that you work in every day, but if people wanted to check in with you, where would they find you on, like, maybe your social media or something like that?
I am on Instagram at Chill with Jill 1210. That's my birthday.
Chill with Jill. Oh, you're Sagittarius like me. I knew there
I
was a reason.
am.
I knew there was a reason I
I
liked you.
knew we got along for a reason.
I knew it. I just knew it. So I'll put that in the show notes. And, I really am so grateful for you taking your time today to share your expertise with the listeners.
Oh, I was happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Wasn't that great? She is so good. She's so good at what she does and super easy to talk to. I have to disclose, now that you've listened to the episode, that was the first time Jill's ever been on a podcast, and you wouldn't have known otherwise. She is really just a light and has so much wisdom in this respect to share with us, because the mental health piece of this diet culture problem, I think, is probably the least talked about, least appreciated, most kind of under the radar. And yet it's probably one of the most important, because we spend a heck of a lot of time talking about the food and our bodies and this pursuit of weight loss. And we don't always get to that second layer, which really is the impact on our emotional and mental health, that we are all suffering from the damage done. So I'm glad Jill was able to come on and share her expertise, and you could listen to our conversation. I want to remind you that, first of all, I am going to be enrolling my next group coaching cycle in less than 2 weeks, and I want you there. This is your opportunity to do a deep dive about all these issues in community with me and other women that are wanting to make the same journey out of diet culture. So the details are in the show notes, how you can click to get on the wait list, and that is non-committal, but it will give you first access when the enrollment opens up at the end of July. And also there's a link to my new Facebook group. If you are interested in these conversations and you don't even want to wait 2 weeks for the coaching to open up, come join the Facebook group. We have been going about a month now and have just a tremendous amount of conversation and engaged participation of women that want to learn about this, heal their relationship with food, and really unpack all this diet culture mess. So I'm inviting you to join me in those places. The links are in the show notes for your access. And I appreciate you once again listening to the podcast. If you have a moment to drop a rating or a review on your podcast platform, I would be so much in gratitude for that. And I appreciate your time. And I'll see you next Wednesday with the next episode of the Eatfluencer podcast. Until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landes MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandesmd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.